This is the place for intellectual, spiritual, and scriptural honesty. And I'd like to welcome Dr. John Shook into the conversation tonight. He has something to offer us all, and that's a chance to move forward. Welcome, Dr. Shook.
Well, good night. How are you?
I'm doing well. I don't sound very well, but doing well.
Well, we have a lot of voices chiming in with us tonight.
That is true. It's going to be difficult for me to talk tonight, so I'm going to hand the ball over to you in a few minutes. But we have some wonderful co-hosts tonight. That would be Bob Graves. Hello, Bob.
Greetings. Good to be here.
Well, it's wonderful having you here all the time. You did a wonderful job on your show this afternoon with Dr. Shook.
Well, thank you.
We also have Christopher Malte. He is one awesome genius of a gentleman, and he's the Most High, and he's great on bass. How are you doing?
Doing well tonight. How's everyone else?
Doing awesome, doing awesome. And we also have the man who says, or actually prays the best, and that would be our biologist, Greg Bray. How are we doing, Greg?
Doing wonderful. Looking forward to the show. I'm, by the way, tonight just going to be playing the role of antagonist. So that's my goal is to throw in jabs whenever I can and upset the conversation. Looking forward to it.
A little bit of jib and jab, right? That wasn't feedback at all. Our guys know what they're doing here. And so we're going to continue to move forward. We have a new guy on the switcher. We have a guy on the jib. And sometimes he lays down on the jib, and so it's just going to work that way tonight. And so we're going to have a lot of fun. We've had a wonderful day today with Dr. Shook. We just got finished having a bite to eat, and that was good. Any thoughts before we introduce our guest?
I'm really excited to just move right into it. We really are blessed in the most secular of senses,
I like
at least from this chair.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Our guest tonight, so maybe I could go ahead and introduce Professor Eric Reitan, who comes to us from Oklahoma State University and its philosophy department. Hi, Eric. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
I should say that by means of disclosure that you and I go way back. We were graduate students together, getting philosophy degrees and then teaching at different places, and then we taught in the same department at Oklahoma State for about 6 years or so, going on a few years back. And it's really great to have this opportunity to chat some more with you.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little more about yourself. You write on several subjects, including Christian ethics, but introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your philosophical journey and tell us about your religious journey. Tell us about any denomination you feel particularly loyal to, and what really interests you at the intersections of philosophy and religion.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of questions all rolled up into one. Let me begin by just saying a little bit about what I do now when I'm not like singing in community theater. I teach primarily ethics and philosophy of religion. Most of my research these days is in philosophy of religion, although I do a lot of social and political philosophy. And much of my, if not most of my early work was relating to ethics and issues of violence. In terms of my intellectual journey, I started out very much thinking of myself as an ethicist, but I was interested in Christian ethics, more specifically the love ethic within the Christian tradition and its intersection with the problems of violence, especially defensive violence and war, and the wrestling within the Christian tradition between more pacifist elements and just war tradition. My journey into philosophy of religion was through.
Well, we seem to have lost Eric, but we're going to get him right back as quick as we can. I'm going to give a shameless plug to Eric's first book. And his first book is called Is God a Delusion? A Reply to Religion's Cultured Despisers. And I gather he was inspired to write this book because of the eruption of what has been called the volcano of new atheism. And Eric, along with many other Christian writers, wrote books in a rapid-fire fashion from about 2006, and the flood still hasn't stopped today. And I think, in my humble opinion, Eric's book was really one of the best of that genre that came out and reacted to the new atheism. It was a very respectful book.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting him back in the show, and they're trying to do the best that anyone can do with Skype. And so,
Am I back?
I think so.
Yes.
We hear you.
Okay.
Welcome.
I used the opportunity to, again, praise your book. As you know, there were many books. Yours is called Is God a Delusion? A Reply to Religion's Cultured Despisers. And I take it that more than just Christian ethics motivated you to write this book. I think the new atheists got under your skin a little bit.
Well, that's one way to put it. I was, my interest in the new atheists, really the first thing that happened was a colleague of mine, whom you know, Jim Kane, gave me a photocopied page from The God Delusion. I did not know where it was from. He didn't want to tell me. And he said, just read this and tell me what you think of it. It was the first page of the chapter in The God Delusion where Dawkins begins to talk about arguments for God. And it specifically talks about Aquinas' first three ways. And I looked at it and I thought, well, he doesn't get Aquinas' first three ways right. And then he attacks these arguments precisely where he gets them wrong. So he's attacking a caricature. Then I found out that, in fact, this was Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, and I got a little bit unhappy that that someone was getting Aquinas wrong. Now, I don't think that Aquinas' first three ways are you know, the be-all and end-all of arguments for God. I think they can be objected to in all kinds of ways.
Definitely not.
But they can be objected to in all kinds of ways. But let's object to the actual arguments, not caricatures that are so. I mean, basically, what Dawkins attributes to Aquinas is an argument whose two main premises contradict each other, and whose first premise contradicts the conclusion. I mean, in effect. And this is not what Aquinas. This is not what Aquinas' argument looks like at all. And so it was a little bit upsetting that this enormous following, this huge bestseller, most people in the world at this point who know anything about Aquinas, in effect, know the caricatured version that Dawkins was presenting. And I got this idea in my head that, as I started reading more in the book, I could write a kind of whole introduction to the philosophy of religion by saying, well, this is what Dawkins says, and this is a more sort of thorough and accurate presentation of these issues in the philosophy of religion. And when I originally pitched my book, that's what I pitched it as a kind of introduction to the philosophy of religion bouncing off of Dawkins' The God Delusion. But my editor talked me into making it less of an academic book, less of a textbook, more of an academic book with crossover appeal to a broader popular audience, and a book that would expand to encompass not just Dawkins' The God Delusion, but this whole atheist literary wave that was sweeping.
It was like a tsunami, Eric. Wasn't it like a tsunami? It was something.
Yeah, it wasn't. wasn't quite a tsunami, but it was sweeping across the intellectual landscape in a significant way in the mid-noughties. That's what the last decade is called, right? The noughties. You should call them that. So it's not. But anyway, yeah. So he got me thinking about what did I really want to write a textbook, and I realized no, I didn't. I wanted to write a book where the main theme was basically that while not all religion is intellectually respectable, not all religion is morally benign, religion can be intellectually respectable and morally benign.
So
And,
you're the one who found the reasonable and moral Christianity. You set out to find the reasonable and moral Christianity that's lurking out there.
Right. I mean, what I wanted to do, in effect, was bounce off of the new atheist attacks on religion, which I took to really have not be targeting all of Christianity or all of theistic religion, but only a certain species of it, and say, well, maybe we can use these attacks to identify the parameters within which theistic religion can be both intellectually respectable and morally benign.
Well, let me ask you,
using the new atheist as a springboard.
Okay. Do you think Dawkins then is mostly right about most of the bad religion, though? Do you have some agreement?
Well, I mean, I agree that I don't think, for example, some people say that when Alistair McGrath, for example, says that when Dawkins attacks faith, he's attacking a straw man, and I don't think that's the correct fallacy to attribute to Dawkins. It's not the straw man fallacy, it's the overgeneralization fallacy or something like that. When Dawkins says that, or characterizes religious faith as just stubborn, willful belief in the teeth of the evidence or without any regard for evidence, he is describing something that is a real phenomenon, right? Something that is a real feature of the religious lives of many people. For many people, that's what faith amounts to, tragically. And so he's not attacking something that isn't real. He's attacking something real, and he's attacking something that ought to be criticized. Where I think he makes a mistake is in then treating this faith, as he describes it, as descriptive of religious faith in some kind of sweeping absolute sense. That there are no alternative understandings that actually describe this certain dimension of the religious life of many people. So that's where I think that that he and other new atheists go wrong. They universalize or generalize from certain highly problematic and versions of religion that are the appropriate targets of criticism, but we shouldn't, apply the vices of these forms of religion to all religion without distinction. That's
all right. Well, I think I can understand that. Chris or Greg, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about Dawkins on faith? And there's a big misunderstanding going on.
I wouldn't mind saying on record here that I think Dawkins does, as somebody who studies biology, Dawkins does an amazing job talking about biology and the theory of evolution, and I think he's written some incredible things there. But I have to say that I actually agree with much of the criticisms laid out about his philosophy. So I can't really disagree with any of the things that Eric has said here today.
Well, we'll find something for you to disagree with. Chris, you want to chime in, Chris?
Well, I did want to say that the popularity of people like Dawkins and the whole new atheist movement had a lot to do with timing, context and culture, right? It was mostly something that was a post 9/11 fervor. It wasn't really, even though it's directed at Christianity mostly now. It was, is really born out of, like I said, 9/11. So mostly like Muslim kind of anti-religion as sentiments, and I think that like new atheism kind of needed people to really be reductionistic in the way that they talked, and they needed bulldogs, and I think that Dawkins was very good at that. That being said, I think he's shrill, and I think that he jumps the shark when he goes from biology to philosophy. So that's where we do have common ground. But I do think that he may have glossed over some things to make a larger point in the God delusion. So the Aquinas points that you're talking about. I can see how in the sense of trying to fit 10 pounds of stuff into a 5 pound bag, he may have gotten some of the details wrong.
Well, I think he did more than just get the details wrong, Aquinas. He took an interesting philosophical argument that is formally very similar in structure to Dawkins' own atheological argument, and he completely misrepresented it as a unsound argument on every level. I think that, well, I mean, basically what Aquinas, or what Dawkins attributes to Aquinas in the the argument from a first cause is something like the following: everything must have a cause, but you can't have an infinite regress of causes. Therefore, you need an uncaused first cause. Well, if everything must have a cause, then you have to have an infinite regress of causes, right? So the first premise contradicts the second, if that's Aquinas' argument. But that's not Aquinas' argument. Aquinas' argument is everything that comes to be must have a cause. The cause either itself is something that comes to be or something that doesn't come to be. If everything, every cause were itself something that came to be, you would have an infinite regress of causes. That is incoherent. Therefore, we must posit something that doesn't come to be, that is the first cause. That's a very different argument, and it's not susceptible to the kinds of objections that Dawkins levels against it. It is susceptible to a variety of objections, but Dawkins completely misses what those objections are and the philosophically interesting material there, because he gets the argument completely wrong.
And just to clarify, it's not an argument that you would use, but for the sake of clarity, you're just saying he doesn't even get that argument right.
He doesn't get that argument right, and he doesn't appreciate what is thought-provoking about the argument, and where the interesting philosophical controversies, right? Can you have an infinite regress, a causal chain that stretches back? That's a very interesting question, philosophically in its own right. And I mean, Aquinas just assumes that you cannot, and that's problematic. But that kind of problem, I think, is worth reflecting on. And he doesn't even get there. Right?
Eric, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you had to pick, forced choice, do you think that the Big Bang is a better sort of evidential basis for trying to show that a God probably exists? Or perhaps, as some believe, do you think that better evidence for God is more in a person's religious experiences? If I had to force you to choose, where's the sounder path to God?
Well, I mean, I tend to favor an experiential approach. I mean, what I would say is that while it's certainly possible to explain away a profound religious experience, one needn't explain it away. My tendency is I don't think that there's any proof for the existence of God. I see theism as a way of seeing our holistic experience. There are other ways of seeing our holistic experience, right? You know, the same duck-rabbit image, right? I think a human experience is, in a certain sense, like that duck-rabbit image, and it can be seen in different ways, and how you see the whole impacts your understanding of certain details, right? If you see this duck-rabbit image as a rabbit, you have a bump that's a nose. If you see it as a duck, it's just a bump, right? So the meaning of things changes depending on how you see things. We can see our holistic, our experience as a whole in a theistic way, I think, or in a non-theistic way. If there's a reason to see it theistically, if there is, you know, something that lends itself to or encourages seeing it theistically, it is personal religious experience, I think. That it's the having of that kind of experience that would motivate one to choose to see things, or to find it hard not to see things in that theistic way, and it's also what a dimension of the whole of experience that if you see things theistically, you're in effect integrating it into your picture as a meaningful piece rather than explaining it away. But of course, there are lots of things that plausibly we have to explain away, and so that something is explained away by a different way of seeing. That is, when I say it's explained away, it's accounted for in such a way that it is treated as delusional or illusory or something like that. That's a way of seeing too, and that can be okay. But I think, I mean, my inclination is not to say that we have any kind of argument for the existence of God or against the existence of God, but rather that there are certain ways of seeing that fit with the entirety of our experience, and there are certain ways of seeing that don't fit, and there are certain religious ways of seeing that don't fit, right? The young earth creationist way of seeing the whole of experience is a very bad fit with the totality of the experience that we have, which includes, of course, the evidence of the sciences. But anyway, I think what would serve as the primary driving force for seeing things theistically, for opting for that way of seeing, is going to be religious experience, not the Big Bang.
Well, as a philosopher, you're very aware that there's religious experiences and then there's religious experiences.
Yeah,
it seems to me that atheists, of course, aren't terribly interested in finding any religious experiences to be capable of proving that any God exists. But it's not just us. As you know, any religion has to put a tremendous amount of work into filtering out most of the things that get called religious experience as incompatible with its own denominational theology. So the real experts at dismissing much of what gets called religious experience are the religions themselves, wouldn't you say, even before you start to get to a naturalistic or atheist standpoint. So how do you decide? What are your criteria that seem to indicate to you authentic religious experiences that make the best fit, as you say, with all the rest of life that we have to deal with?
And when he's answered that,
Well,
if I might, I'd like to just offer something too, but after Eric has answered.
One of the things I want to point out is that I think we need to distinguish between, and this is always hard to do, between the experience and the interpretation of the experience. And this is even hard you're drawing the line here. What is sort of the raw experience, and what is, my interpretation of it, invoking the conceptual categories that are most present to me and are, a part of my, personal or cultural narrative that I then bring to bear on the experience and use to make sense of it, or some of our concepts that are, culturally derived actually shape the character of the experience itself. Some of these concepts don't actually shape the character of the experience, but determine what we take it to mean, and what I would call our interpretation of it. And in what I think that more exclusivistic religions are very good at doing, as you say, is failing to notice that underlying diverse accounts of religious experience, there may be some very shared themes that where the differences in diversity might be explicable in terms of differences in interpretation, or the invocation of different conceptual categories for shaping and making sense of the experience coming in. The, if you will, malleability of the experience does admittedly mean that the experience is not going to speak univocally in favor of a single theology, a single set of doctrines, or a single belief system. Again, I think we might even invoke the ways of seeing idea that I was mentioning earlier, and bring to bear on the religious experiences themselves, that they can all be seen in a variety of different ways. And what we have is many religions being very good at insisting that their way of seeing these experiences is the only plausible, the only coherent, the only right way of seeing it, and all these other religions are just therefore having a completely different kind of experience that is not anything like theirs.
Right.
When really,
that's right.
They may be having the same experience and they're just seeing it differently. So I mean, that said, there's some nevertheless some kind of content, as William James puts it, when he's talking about mystical experience. It gestures in a direction. I'm not sure if that's his precise wording, but it's something like that. That it's gesturing in a certain direction, even if it is not articulate, or is not properly articulated in terms of the specific doctrine. That there's more, right, than what we encounter in our ordinary experience. That there is a different level to reality, that it's somehow more fundamental and should be a source of optimism and hope. That seems to be the gesture, or the direction in which these experiences gesture.
Well, I'm curious whether you think all religious experiences can be interpreted to point in the same direction, whether or not there's one God that they all try to point to. But I think we had folks who wanted to chime in with a question. Who wanted to go next?
I did want to just say a few
Sure,
things.
go ahead.
Very much appreciated Eric's response to that. I thought that was would be very similar to my own. I think of my my own family that I come from. There's 7 siblings, and we each have a slightly different version of our father, our dad, and there's a sense in which we've each interpreted that very, very differently, and through our own experience and our own development. And I think that that is part of what's going on here. That just because people have an experience of something, there's a very that we've all experienced that we're the same guy, but we experienced him very differently, and in some ways he even behaved differently toward us. But also something that I discovered as I went on through life is that some of the things that I actually attributed to my dad didn't really belong to him at all. And so I'm a failed observer. I think when it comes to experience, I would think that there's plenty of room that there are various things that are thought to be religious experiences that probably are not. How do we determine this? I don't know that we have a really good litmus test, but it would seem to me that when we have these experiences, that many of them can be. I think that it comes down to the bottom line here is, though, that something I think that Eric is trying to say here as well is that we're not really talking about proof. We're just talking about the possibility really remains open and coherent and is not disallowed. And that's not as strong as many people would like to have it. But, you know, that's just seems to be that is what it is.
Well, I mean, getting back to sort of themes in Is God a Delusion? One of the things that I wanted to develop was a view of faith that I thought I saw in practice in the lives of more progressive religious believers that I knew, and the way I articulated this understanding of faith was that it was a decision to live as if a hoped for possibility is true. And each element of that, it was important to me. Possibility, it can't be something that's just not a good fit with the totality of experience. It has to be a real possibility, a real way of seeing what is in front of us. And a hoped for possibility, a possibility that has a pull on us, and it's a decision to live as if, so it's pragmatic, a decision to live as if this possibility that that appeals to us because of its hopefulness is true. And in some cases, it's motivated by the decision that you like who you are better when you live as if this picture of things is right. I like who I am better when I interpret the intractability of some people to rational argument and to being reached out to compassionately. When I interpret conflict and hostility and violence, not in terms of the idea that there are some people who are just unreachable, living in a different moral universe that can't be connected with. That some people are just bad. I don't like who I am when I interpret the evidence of humanity as some people are just bad. I like who I am better when I interpret humanity and the evidence that I have of humanity in terms of this idea that some people are so covered in the crud of living that it's hard to reach that which within them that gravitates towards the good. But that doesn't mean that it isn't there and can't be reached. I like who I am better when I interpret things that way. It's a more hopeful picture, and it's a possibility. And so I choose to live as if that hoped for picture is true. And we can call that my faith in humanity, right?
Well, you've given me a terrific segue, because I do think hope is very important to religion. I think we can agree there. There wouldn't be a thing called religion if it wasn't about the future as much as it was about the past. But tell us about the big future. What happens to us after we die, Eric? Do we have the right to picture whatever heaven we want to hope for the most? Is that what religion really is about? paint a pretty picture of what we should hope for?
Well, let me start by saying I don't know what happens when we die. Maybe we cease to exist. If my most recent book, which is what you're gesturing towards.
Yeah, we should give it a plug. It's called God's Final Victory, and it is a philosophical case for universalism. So you could work in a little bit of an explanation about what universalism is as we go along.
And if I could chime in a moment, I'm a
with,
fan of the blog
my friend
that
John
you
Cronin.
have. I've been reading it for some time, and I really like the distinction that you made about dogmatic universalism versus I forget the other term. I'm going off of memory here. I was looking for it on your blog earlier, but the hopeful, I think, hopeful and dogmatic universalism. So if you could touch on that for just a moment as well. I thought it was a well-nuanced point.
And to be fair, I should say quite loudly what Eric got while we were talking. He has a co-author on God's Final Victory, and of course that's his colleague John Cronin. So a shout out to John. It's really a very interesting book and very well done. So Eric, tell us about these kinds of universalisms and what we can hope for.
Okay, well, first off, yeah, in one blog post, there's this distinction that is made between what's called hopeful universalism typically and what's typically called dogmatic universalism. And I'm not quite happy with those labels. Hopeful universalism is typically used to refer to the view that universal salvation is consistent, well, within the Christian tradition, let's say, is consistent with broader Christian doctrine and Christian views about God, and hence something that we can hope for, but there is no guarantee that that all will be saved, given Christian doctrine. Whereas dogmatic universalism says, well, given Christian doctrine, there is something like a guarantee that all will be saved. I say that I don't like the terminology because I think that what's often called dogmatic universalism needn't be dogmatic in the sense that most of us think about when we use that term. One could think that given Christian doctrine, broader Christian beliefs about God, the best fit with those beliefs, far better than any other view that one might adopt, is the view that all are saved. But one could be non-dogmatic about that. One could be a fallibilist about that. One could say, I could be wrong, but this is my best judgment about what doctrine fits best with broader Christian teachings. One might be quite dogmatic in one's hopeful universalism, in the more sort of conventional sense of dogmatic. One might say, I think that universalism is consistent with Christian teachings, but is not implied by it, and I'm certain that that's right, and I couldn't be wrong about that, right? And such a person would be really dogmatic in their hopeful universalism, and in their view about these things. So I think the terminology can lead us a little bit astray, and we should be careful about that.
Well, let me just stop you a minute, Eric. We're aware that universalism means. Let me just check what you say. Take to mean just sort of generally. Everybody gets into heaven. Everyone's saved. Is that the basic sense of universalism?
Yeah, universalism is the view that all all persons eventually experience salvation, however that's going to be construed. And of course, different religious traditions have different understandings of salvation. God's final victory is focused on the Christian tradition, and so is working with a broadly Christian, fairly traditional understanding of salvation as union with God in love, the experience of the beatific vision in community with all who are experiencing the beatific vision. So heaven is the state of loving communion between those who are saved, whether it's everyone or just a few, and God. And the essential feature of it, essential features in the Christian tradition are the experience, the immediate experience of God, and what follows from that. Moral sanctification is often in the tradition, the most significant feature, rather than, some sort of, it's almost Aristotelian in the tradition that virtue is of the essence of happiness. So if you're going to have perfect bliss, what that means is that you're going to be morally sanctified. You are going to be perfected in your moral potential, and that this is the greatest reward of salvation, the eventual perfecting of your
But
moral.
Eric, isn't the whole point of Christianity that some people just don't deserve it, and that's why they deserve hell? Isn't that essential to
Well,
Christianity?
I know. I don't think that's the whole point of Christianity. I think that's if I were to diagnose where this started to happen, I would say that early on in Christian history, some people anticipated Madison Avenue sales techniques. The message of spreading good news became shifted towards spreading bad news, and you might have a few flakes and not even know it. You've got a problem.
You've got sin.
You've got the solution. Right?
Wash that sin right out of your hair, right?
Right.
Could I
think
interject something here, if it's possible?
That this "you are doomed" message, unless you buy our product, Christianity, is a distortion of the original concept of evangelism, which was about spreading this wonderful news. It became spreading bad news.
Isn't that Jesus's fault, Eric? Doesn't Jesus talk about hell? Wasn't it there in the beginning?
Well, I mean, there's of course a lot of uncertainty about exactly what Jesus said. If we're taking the scriptures that are in the Christian New Testament as a good record, what we have Jesus talking about, Jesus talked a lot in hyperbole and metaphor, and he mentioned quite frequently this fiery trash heap outside of Jerusalem as obviously some metaphor for what happens to some people.
So you're saying Jesus didn't believe in the hell that, we get in the medieval woodcuts and in Catholic theology, not that hell.
That eventually emerged within the Christian tradition. The evolution of the theory of hell is, very interesting. But
that's why people should buy their book.
Back into Jesus, that's quite natural and understandable. But if you look at exactly what Jesus is saying in the scriptures, it's not what this modern conception of hell, or even a medieval conception of hell, is. That's all sort of imported into the scriptures by contemporary and earlier medieval readers as well. But I'm not a biblical scholar. I've obviously, having written a book, have studied the hell texts and thought a bit about them. There, um, uh, there are a few that that seem to suggest something like, the doctrine of eternal damnation, but including in Jesus' parables. But it's very hard to draw doctrine out of anything that Jesus says, because Jesus is talking in stories and parables. He's often deliberately hyperbolic.
Right.
But one thing that is clear is this notion of desert, that you deserve some heavenly reward or some abysmal fate, is something that Jesus explicitly challenged in some of those parables. Although there are some parables in which, the parable about where the guy hires people at various points throughout the day and gives them all the same wage at the end, and those who were hired at dawn are just furious, and that they didn't get paid more. And Jesus says, this is the way the kingdom of heaven is, and other kinds of stories where Jesus is clearly challenging this terrestrial notion of desert. That he clearly challenges the lex talionis idea, right? He says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I say turn the other cheek, right? He's challenging our inherited and conventional notions of
Well, I know Bob wants to jump in here, but it sounds like you're saying that God can't hate anybody. But Bob, I know you've been itching to say something.
Yeah, first of all, on the topic that we're on now, and I wanted to go back to something we went through earlier before it gets too far beyond us. I do get the impression that this word for hell just meant the grave, but because it was the same word used in Greek culture for their mythological Hades, that it just kind of over time, I think, just kind of worked its way in, and it worked well for the manipulative sale. But anyway, I wanted to go back to this notion of hope. I realize there's a lot of theists who look to their faith as a form of hope, and I've always been someone who I never related to that. I became a theist when I was 7 years of age, and it really had to do with just a sense of the presence of God that was constantly with me, and at that age, I was going to a very liberal church. They never really preached from the Bible or anything like that, and I didn't even really know what their story was. And I didn't even have any sense that there was anything that I needed to hope for. It was just a presence. It was a company, as it were. And I believed in it, because it seemed to be there. And then later, when I started getting involved with this theology stuff where people are talking about hope, I thought, well, that's wonderful, but I've never related to that. And one of the reasons I think I find that the concept of experience certainly leans one very much in the direction, if they've had that experience, that but I don't relate hope to it personally.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do connect what you're talking about to hope in a broad sense. I mean, there's different ways that religion can be about hope, but
Right.
When you have an experience that feels very real and is life affirming, but it is the substantive content that it seems to be pointing you towards is not something that, if you will, is part of your ordinary field of experience. You might decide to, out of fear of being duped by some funny misfirings in your brain, conclude that this experience is just not something to be trusted, and I'm just not going to believe it. Or out of a spirit of hope, choose to take it at face value.
Yeah, I can see at 7. I don't
and
think
it's a hope for the present, not for some future, afterlife or anything like that, but it could still be construed as a kind of religious hope, I think.
Yeah, of course, at the age of 7, I don't think I was I was sophisticated enough to think in terms of, oh, wonder if I could have an experience that is really a deception. But I can say this, that if I could relate hope to it anyway, I certainly grew up in a home that was not a loving home. And this presence was comfortable, so there was, hope in that, I guess, in that sense.
I would like to nuance on that. I appreciate how you discuss it as a pragmatic effort as well. When you talk about it being hopeful, that it still boils down to just living your life as if it is the case for the pragmatic benefit of doing so, just in case. So that the hope leads its way out the same regardless, even I guess, of the end result. And that's, I guess, what I was trying to get to with the question about your hopeful versus dogmatic universalism was that you, Eric, are a dogmatic. I think you coined the better term of confident, but you're, from at least what I was reading in your blog, a hopefully confident universalist. Would that be the best way to describe you?
That would be a good way to put it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty confident that based on my reflections, philosophical reflections on the relationship between universalism and broader Christian theology and the rivals for universalism and broader Christian theology, that philosophically universalism is the best fit. I'm pretty confident of that after years of thinking about this, but I'm also a fallibilist, and I know I could be wrong.
Well, and Eric, are you talking about this being a good fit for you? But what I want to know is, do you feel that same sort of hope for the fate of, well, Richard Dawkins? Let's bring it back around where we started. Even if Richard Dawkins doesn't think that there's an afterlife, can you have hope for Richard Dawkins? Is he going to heaven?
I mean, well, when Christopher Hitchens passed away, I wrote a piece for Religion Dispatches eulogizing Hitchens, who was my favorite of the new atheists. I just sort of liked his spunky character. There was something just adorable about him, although he was also a jerk. So anyway, but when I in this piece, I said, one of the things that really drove Hitchens clearly was a passion for the truth, whatever the truth is. And that orientation of a person towards truth, if God is the truth, is then going to translate into an orientation towards God. If if there is an afterlife, if there is a God and he encounters this and he has this dispositional orientation towards the truth, then pretty quickly he's going to be in a state of blessedness, far more quickly than those who stubbornly cling to their own image of God out of some kind of determination that they are going to be right and everyone else is going to be wrong. Their ultimate devotion isn't to truth, and they're going to have, if there is a God, and if this God seeks a relationship with them, there are going to be dispositional impediments to such a relationship in their case. Now, as a universalist, I think that those dispositional impediments can be overcome.
This is extraordinary.
There are many theists who are further away from salvation than Richard Dawkins.
If I understand you, it could be the case that a Bible-thumping fundamentalist has to wait longer to get into heaven than maybe Richard Dawkins.
I would agree.
I think that's a possibility. But I mean, there
Wow.
is some
Extraordinary.
pride issues that Dawkins seems to suffer from as well. So I mean, I'm not gonna, you know.
Let me jump into the mix real quick before you go any further, Eric. I've really enjoyed some of the things that you've been saying. You were talking about hell a while ago, and one of the things that I find fascinating about the subject of hell is that there isn't a lexical theorist out there who would even suggest that in any of the manuscripts, that compile First and Second Temple Hebrew, Aramaic, and Koine, and a few Attic, would even suggest that there is even a paradigmatic or a syntagmatic analysis that would provide us with the idea of hell. And we would have to interpolate that actually out of mythology to force it in. And my question would be to you, with that stated, there isn't a linguistic argument for hell. Do you find that would be possibly a good thing for your ideas in universalism?
If I understand you correctly, it was a little bit hard for me to follow. There's anything like our contemporary understanding of hell is something we need to read into the scriptures. It's not there. And that does make it much more difficult for the hellist, by which I mean the person who strongly stands by the doctrine of hell, to make the case on scriptural grounds that the doctrine of hell is the right doctrine. If that's much harder to make on scriptural grounds, then the scriptural passages that you find in Paul's letters that seem to gesture quite unambiguously towards universalism are less opposed, and you have a more scriptural case for universalism. Now, as a philosopher, my main interest is in the more philosophical case, given a certain view of God and certain other doctrinal beliefs, which doctrine is the best fit, right? Which view logically fits better, and there's a lot, of course, that's involved in making that kind of analysis. But that's what John Cronin and I attempt to do. We do have a chapter on scripture, but our focus is more on the philosophical case.
In the Pauline corpus, one of the things that I find to be so fascinating would be the letter that's very much a corrective letter and gives excellent definition, that is, to what love is. It states that love is patient and kind. I don't find many people arguing against that. If we continue reading, I agree with the NIV translators when they suggest that love doesn't even keep a record of wrongs. And so that's quite compelling. That is, according to your theological mindset, in a sense, if God is love, and if love doesn't keep a record of wrongs, how could there be a hell? How could there be this judgment that we've been talking about all of these many years? And so how does that fit within your context of theology?
Well, what you offer is a powerful, the basis for a powerful response to what John Cronin and I call the classical doctrine of hell, which is a retributive-based doctrine. And one of the things that's interesting, however, is that Christian philosophers who have defended the doctrine of hell have gravitated over the last decades more and more towards what we call a liberal doctrine of hell, where if anyone is damned, they're damned by their own free choices, by willfully, persistently refusing God. So God doesn't hold grudges. God wants the salvation of all. God is reaching out to all, but there are some who just sort of willfully and stubbornly persist in saying no, 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 and they suffer damnation for it. They're in hell by their own choice. And that liberal doctrine, you find the basic gist of it in C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce. Lewis says the gates of hell are locked from the inside. For me, that was the most philosophically interesting version of hell to wrestle with, because it really forced me to think a lot about the concept of freedom and what is a free choice, and whether one can coherently imagine someone freely choosing not just one decision opportunity, but for all eternity, consistently keep on choosing what is supremely bad for them, and keep on rejecting what is supremely good for them, and do make that choice freely. And what does it mean to make a choice freely? Well, if you don't know what you're choosing, is it a free choice? And I don't think so, right? If you don't understand the stakes and what it is that you're choosing, it can't be really a free choice. So if this is going to be a free choice, you have to choose the outer darkness, knowing that it is the outer darkness and the very worst possible thing that could ever happen to you, right? Over eternal bliss, knowing that it's eternal bliss and the very best thing that could ever happen to you. And knowing that there is nothing that could conceivably make the choice of the outer darkness worth it, right? It just won't be, but you choose it anyway, right? Could you even imagine a free choice like that? And could you imagine a free choice like
Eric, do we know that
just
now? Do we have all this knowledge now, Eric, in this mortal life, or do we have to wait until after we die to have all of this knowledge about the choice?
Right. We don't have fully free choices now, right? And that's one of the one of the points to make, that.
Well, why doesn't God just show us now? What's God waiting for?
What is he in for?
That's a different, a whole different question, and it's relates to the problem of evil, the problem of divine hiddenness, and I mean there are some interesting theological directions we can take, exploring those problems, which are not easy, but keeping focus on the doctrine of hell. What I would want to say is this: the doctrine of hell and embracing it does not make any of those problems, those theological problems, any easier. It makes those theological problems harder. Because if you embrace the doctrine that some people are eternally alienated in the end, then whatever divine gamble motivated the decision to remain hidden and obscure was a bad gamble, if it's a God of love that we're talking about.
Sure.
So I think, you're talking about some serious, problems that theists have to wrestle with. I think theists who believe in hell have an even bigger problem there to wrestle with than universalists.
You're aware of Pastor Rob Bell, who came out with a book, a couple years ago now, called Love Wins. If he was watching right now, what would you say to him? Would you say, carry on, soldier, I'm with you? Would you suggest some theological tweakings? I know a lot of people took great interest in the heresies of Rob Bell. I don't know how close you intended to stand beside him, but in denying hell, you seem to have made some good company. So for people frightened about leaving hell behind, what could you say to them right now?
You want me to? Well, you had two questions. What would I say to Rob Bell, and what would I say to the people frightened?
Too frightened maybe to follow Rob Bell, to follow you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, with respect to Rob Bell, I read his book, and one of the things that struck me was that he was not nearly as heretical, if you will, as he might at first have seemed to be. he toyed with universalism. He comes out maybe edging towards hopeful universalism, but then ultimately takes very seriously something more like C.S. Lewis's "The gates of hell are locked from the inside." I'm not sure how different he is really ultimately from Lewis, um, but at least he's asking questions and taking seriously universalism in a way that megachurch pastors haven't in the past. There are reasons, lots of reasons why people are afraid of giving up on the doctrine of hell. One common reason that seems to be in play is a fear that the Christian mission of evangelism becomes pointless. But I think this relates back to an earlier point that I was making about how Christianity early on was distorted from shouting good news from the mountaintop into Madison Avenue sales tactic, where you convince people that everything is wrong, and then you offer the fix. And evangelism in that former sense is not in any way threatened by giving up on the doctrine of hell. Another fear that people have is that there won't be any motive to be good if you give up on the doctrine of hell.
Aren't people only good when they're afraid of punishment, Eric?
Well,
they're never good.
Here I'd like something that Martin Luther said. Not that I agree with it, but I think it's clever. And it points to something that I do agree with. He said, anyone who becomes a Christian out of fear of hell is well on the road to hell. And the point that he's making is that fear as a motivator for outwardly good behavior is not the kind of display of moral character that would earn anyone salvation. Now, of course, Luther didn't believe that you earned salvation anyway. I'm enough of a Kantian to be enamored of the idea that when we're truly being moral, we're doing the right thing because it's right, not because of fear of some kind of extrinsic punishment. And I'm enough of an Aristotelian to believe that virtue is its own reward, that when we live good, noble lives, the best thing about that for us is that we're leading good, noble lives. Wow, what a great prize to get from leading a great, noble life. I am leading a great, noble life, right? I mean, I am making of my life something meaningful and valuable and good.
It's what each atheist aspires to. That's why they don't need any external reward or punishment, right?
Can I follow up on that comment there?
Universalism is closer to secular humanism in its idea that the motive for morality is not found in the next life, right? That's not why we should be good. In an important sense, if you're a universalist, the reasons to be good and the reasons to avoid evil are going to ultimately be because of what here and now those choices mean for us today.
Right. I agree.
So I have a question as a follow-up, I guess, to the last several statements that you've made. And going back to what I had said about your, or I guess what I'd referenced about your being pragmatic in your approach to your belief in your theology. And my question is, what is the pragmatic benefit or difference even from your approach to being an atheist and secular humanist? I mean, it seems in many ways as though I'm having trouble at least coming up with a distinction as to why the end result is really any different.
I don't think it is.
Okay. So the question is, how does theism of this progressive stripe that I'm advocating look differently in practice? And I mean, that's an interesting question. I think that the differences needn't and probably aren't primarily in outward behavior, right? I mean, I think there can be within the best kinds of secular humanist philosophies a sufficient a motivation for moral behavior that that will lead to lives that are similar. But
doesn't it follow then
is,
that Christian evangelism is almost in a way taken down by that then? I mean, if you're evangelizing at least to secular humanist atheists and telling them the good, even in your approach of just proclaiming the good news about it and not, trying to say, we're going to sell you this and get them to switch over.
However, and it's not on the level of the individual. It has to do with, we live in a world in which there is an enormous amount of misery and suffering, right? And if the universe is, as Martin Luther King Jr. put it, if the universe bends towards justice, if there is cosmic companionship in the struggle for justice, there is a kind of buoyancy of hope. Again, King's language is just coming to my mind, that that carries along the agent of justice with the idea that there's a trajectory that they are on, that I think maybe means that the acting for justice has a different kind of internal flavor. In some cases, I think there are resources for not giving up in despair, right, in the fight against injustice. But I also think, William James makes these points very nicely, that even if there is no cosmic companionship on the fight for justice, even if there is no bending of the universe towards the good in some ultimate sense, if you make a difference, you've made a difference, right? For however many you've made a difference for. But still, there's, for many people, it can be extremely hard. It maybe takes a certain kind of fortitude of character. Not that theists don't have this fortitude of character, but it's almost required, perhaps, of secular humanists to stay the course in the fight for justice. So that, is perhaps a pragmatic difference that's worth keeping in mind. But there's also an inner, for the theist who is fighting for justice, there's the sense that you are in that behavior in tune with reality on the deepest level, that you are harmonizing with the deepest reality. I'm not sure how much that can be, a secular humanist could say that.
Well,
Because
secular humanists
I
try
could say
to not commit to things that they really don't have much evidence for
Right.
in general.
If I could just also say, though, Greg, I don't think you give yourself and Dr. Shook enough credit. You see, because as a universalist, and I got there mostly through studying linguistics and just discrediting the development of the doctrine as it evolved. But anyhow, the truth is, as the church was becoming an organ for teaching that there's this great danger of hell, but we've got the solution to save you from it. The atheists have been proudly proclaiming the real good news that there's nothing to worry about, and I think that the original good news was that, and we didn't have a lot of atheists around before, and I think that there's a sense in which perhaps because of the cultural context where atheism is, a message of there's nothing to worry about, that. The evangelism is, I think, maybe not as essential, but I really get the impression that the real message had among other things, an impact of don't worry about it. It's not going to be a problem.
Well, for the record, Bob, I think you may be the first person in my entire lifetime who's told me I'm not giving myself enough credit. But thank you.
Well, we want to give Eric Reitan a tremendous amount of credit. We regret that our time is limited tonight, but we hope to have you back, Eric, sometime in the future because you're so eloquent and you're so very clear. And we really appreciate how someone with an education and working at the heights of both philosophy and theology can really step up and give us some fresh perspectives on where we might move forward in these such important topics as ethics and immortality and what religion tries to do for humanity.
I agree.
Yes, very good.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I've enjoyed our conversation very much.
Let's do this real quick. Everybody take just about a minute and give your final thoughts. Greg, let's start with you.
Well, I'm happy to see that it's not saving me for the last, put me on the spot for praying here. But I wanted to say thank you, Eric, and it is, of course, for joining us tonight, but it is a sincere thank you for what you do for the movement and the advances in liberal Christian theology. I think it's a wonderful difference that you've made, and I cannot say enough about how impressed I am with the things that you've written. Of course, you and I don't agree on everything, but I think on, again, a pragmatic level, the things that really matter and how we affect the world, I am just blown away by you. And anybody who is not reading your book or your books, your blog, things of that nature, really should check it out. And I know we've plugged your books, but we have not yet mentioned the URL for your blog. So what is that one again?
It's www.thepietythatliesbetween, all one word, .blogspot.com.
Very good.
So,
Thank you.
Or you can just Google The Piety That Lies Between, which is extracted from a Plutarch essay. Is the quotation.
Excellent.
Christopher.
Well, I hope that everyone joins me in exploring the piety that lies between, as well as Is God a Delusion and the upcoming book, God's Final Victory. I think that you had some fantastic things to say. I'm looking forward to finding out more of your perspective. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to talk a little about our perspective of compassionism and how that would kind of dovetail with the very things that you're talking about with your universalism. And but maybe that could be another conversation for another day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bob, what are your final thoughts?
I thought it was a great conversation, and I think we've really been blessed to have our stand-in host of Dr. Shook being able to take over with your voice there, being on the fritz there, Dr. Jones. But I also enjoyed very much, Jeff, the things that you had to say. I felt very much in sync with much of it. Makes me curious to see and read more about what you've had to say. And I'm so glad that we can talk about these things in a manner where we're really just dealing with these issues and these questions. And I particularly appreciated, Jeff, your ability to.
I think you mean Eric, right, Bob?
Oh,
You
yeah,
mean
Eric. Why was I saying Jeff? Yeah, Eric. Yeah. But you had this
Way
ability.
past your bedtime, Bob.
I know, yeah, and I only got 2 hours of sleep last night, so I'm like, wow. But the clarity that you use to nuance and make sure that you're trying to avoid some of the silliness that can sometimes be part of theology. I really appreciate that. It's great that you've been doing that. Thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Eric, we would love to have you come back, and maybe next time I will have some kind of voice, because I've got a million questions to ask you. You're such a wonderful person.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'd love to come back.
Well, thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent.
Dr. Shook, it's been wonderful. You did a wonderful job tonight.
Oh, well, thank you very
hosting.
much.
Yeah, awesome. Looking forward to a wonderful day tomorrow, and hopefully you guys will, contact your friends. We're going to do several road shows throughout the weekend. Dr. Shook's going to be on various shows on Sunday also, and this has been fun tonight. And I promised that Greg would pray again, and I love this, the atheists, when they get to pray, and I get to shouting hallelujah and all of that kind of stuff. And so, Greg, please pray.
There you go.
Here we come on the spot. So
Here we go.
I anticipated this one today, and today the closing prayer that I wanted to make is in relation to my secular humanist compassionist viewpoints, because today I wanted to once again say thank you to you, Eric, but then an appeal in this case, not to a divine power, but to the power of humanity, to seek out one another and have conversations like this one, and bring things together. And actually, I have a quote here. It's short, but did I? Oh, I thought I had the quote, but it's not. I apologize. I thought I had it clipped, but apparently I hadn't pasted that. But it is of yours, Eric, with regards to bringing people together. I think it actually may be right here. The doctrine of biblical inerrancy has the effect of inspiring its adherents to pay more attention to a text than to the neighbors they are called upon to love. Sometimes it even inspires them to plug up their ears with Bible verses so that they can no longer hear the anguished cries of neighbors whose suffering is brought on by allegiance to the literal sense of those very texts. The cries of the neighbors, the suffering, those are the things that motivate me to make a difference here. So regardless of what any text says, I absolutely 100% am with you, and I hope that all of our viewers and everybody can take a page out of that book and start to apply that philosophy to their lives.
Well said, well said.
And I can say amen to all of that. That was wonderful. Thank you, Greg. This has been fun. We will see you again tomorrow. Thank you for your time.